Look, I'm going to tell you something that a lot of people don't want to hear, and I get it. We like to believe in community. We like to think that when things get hard, people band together. And maybe in the first 12 hours of a blackout they do. But I've seen what happens when the power stays off, when people get hungry, when desperation sets in. And I'm telling you right now, the neighbor who waved at you last Tuesday is not the same person you'll meet on day 5 of a grid-down scenario. I spent 14 years in uniform. I've deployed 3 times. I've seen what happens to communities when the structure holding them together suddenly disappears. Law enforcement can't respond. Supply chains break. And the average person, the one you see at the mailbox every morning, starts operating on a completely different set of rules. This isn't cynicism. This is pattern recognition. And if you're going to survive what's coming, you need to see those patterns clearly. The first thing you need to understand is that a neighborhood isn't a unit. It's a collection of strangers who all happen to pay mortgages on the same block. You don't know their desperation level. You don't know if they have kids at home who haven't eaten in 2 days. You don't know if they're looking at you and your visible supplies and making calculations about how to feed their family. That's not a moral failure on their part. That's survival, but it's still a threat to you. Here's what happens in the hours right after a major blackout. Everything is fine at first. The first 4 to 6 hours, people think it's temporary. They assume the power company is handling it. They stay home, they play with their phones, they eat the food in their fridge before it goes bad. You might see neighbors in the street. Maybe you chat. Maybe you feel that momentary sense of community. But here's the thing. Nobody is desperate yet. Desperation shows up on day 2. That's when people realize this isn't a 2-hour outage. That's when the medication without refrigeration starts becoming a problem. That's when the formula for the baby needs more water and nobody's got any. That's when the calculus changes. By day 3, the community facade starts cracking. You'll start seeing people checking on others, sure, but you'll also start seeing people watching what supplies you have, watching when you go inside your house, watching if you leave. I'm not saying everyone becomes a criminal. What I'm saying is that everyone becomes an evaluator, and some of them will be evaluating whether you're a viable target. The mistake that most people make is broadcasting that they're prepared. They've got supplies, they've got food, they've got water. They mention it casually to neighbors. Quote 0, quote 1. You think you're being friendly. You're signaling that you're responsible and organized. What they're hearing is, quote 2. During Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, I had a friend who lived through that. He told me that by week 2, neighborhoods had completely fractured. The people who'd been obvious about their preparations, they were getting visited. Not always violently, but they were getting visited. People would ask for water. They'd ask for food. And when the answer was no, some of them would come back with more people. Some of them would watch the house at night. Some of them would take what they needed. My friend said the worst part wasn't even the taking. It was the sense that privacy had completely evaporated. Your home is no longer a fortress. It's a resource that other people know about. So here's the first hard rule. Operational security during a blackout is not optional. It's the difference between safety and vulnerability. You don't mention your supplies to neighbors. You don't talk about your generator, your solar panels, your water storage, your food supplies. You certainly don't post about it on social media. And you don't broadcast when you're vulnerable. If you're home alone during the day because your spouse is at work, your neighbors don't need to know that. If you're running to the store because you need something specific, you don't need to announce it. You move quietly. You keep your mouth shut. You let people think you're just getting by like everyone else. This isn't paranoia. This is operating based on what actually happens in these scenarios. And I say that as someone who has seen the good and bad in human nature. The good parts show up when resources are abundant and systems are functioning. The bad parts show up when there's scarcity and no enforcement. You need to plan for that. Here's another dynamic that doesn't get talked about enough. The local tough guys. In every neighborhood, there's usually someone with a little more muscle, a little more aggression, a little more willingness to solve problems with force. Under normal circumstances, they're just another person. Maybe they're a contractor, maybe they play football, maybe they have a security background. But in a grid-down scenario, they might become the informal authority in your neighborhood. And they might start operating like it. I've read after-action reports from areas hit by major hurricanes. I've talked to people who've lived through extended power outages. The pattern is consistent. If law enforcement presence is light or non-existent, informal power structures fill the void. Sometimes those are positive, sometimes they're not. But they're rarely going to be protecting your interests specifically. They're going to be protecting their family and enforcing whatever rules benefit them. Think about it logically. If you're the strongest person on your block and the police aren't coming and people are getting desperate, what's stopping you from deciding that everyone with supplies should contribute to the collective good? Nothing. And some people won't see it as theft. They'll see it as redistribution, survival, justice even. It doesn't matter how they frame it. The result for you is the same. You lose your supplies, your security, your autonomy. This is where situational awareness becomes critical. You need to know who lives near you, what resources they visibly have, and what kind of people they are. Not in a creepy surveillance way, just in a practical way. Which neighbors have kids? Which ones have visible firearms? Which ones have generators that they're already running and maintaining? Which ones look like they're struggling? Which ones are the type to help? Which ones are the type to take? You also need to understand the concept of trust networks. In a real emergency, people don't trust the general neighborhood. They trust subsets, their family, their closest neighbors, maybe their church group or their workplace crew. These are people they've vetted, people they have ongoing relationships with. The broader neighborhood isn't a trust network, it's a risk pool. And you need to assess it accurately. Here's what I recommend. Before a blackout happens, establish a small vetted group. Not everybody on your street. Maybe 2 or 3 households that you already trust, that have good relationships with you, that you've talked to about preparedness. These people should ideally be spread out in your neighborhood rather than clustered together. This way, if something happens, you have people to check on and people checking on you. But it's small enough that you can actually verify who they are and what they're about. When you establish these relationships, don't make it weird. Don't say, I'm establishing a mutual aid network for grid-down scenarios. Just naturally talk to people you like. Invite them to a neighborhood gathering. See how they think about things. Do they stress about problems, or do they solve them? Are they the kind of person who helps others in the normal world? Those traits tend to persist in emergencies, but here's the critical part. You don't tell your broader neighborhood that this group exists. You don't telegraph that you have trusted relationships. You don't advertise mutual aid. You just act normal. The goal is to be invisible. To be the household that nobody thinks about because you don't seem interesting, you don't seem desperate, and you don't seem like you have anything worth taking. Which brings me to the second part of this, hardening. You need to make your house less attractive as a target. This doesn't mean boarding up windows and looking like a fort. That actually draws attention. It means being subtle. Running your generator at night, not during the day when the sound carries. Not having windows lit up when everyone else is dark. Not hanging solar panels in a way that screams, we have power and water. Physical security matters, but so does operational discipline. You lock your doors. You keep valuables out of sight. You don't leave tools or supplies visible from the street. You park your car in the garage if you have one. If you have a bug-out bag ready, you don't keep it by the front door where a casual break-in would get it. You think about what you're advertising with your choices, and you make choices that advertise nothing. I also need to mention the psychology of proximity. When a blackout starts, people's threat assessment is hyperlocal. The person 3 blocks away is not a threat in their mind. The person across the street absolutely is. So the closer you are to people, the more important operational security becomes. If you live in a dense urban area, this is crucial. If you live on a rural property with your nearest neighbor a quarter mile away, you have some breathing room. But most people are somewhere in the middle, and they need to act accordingly. There's also the reality of dependency. During a blackout, neighborhoods often fracture along lines of preparedness. The people who have resources suddenly have all the leverage, and leverage corrupts. I know that sounds harsh, but look at what happens in every collapse scenario. The person with food becomes the person making decisions. The person with water becomes the local authority. This isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's necessary and good, but it's never equal. So here's the dark truth. Being visibly prepared can make you a target, and being invisibly prepared but publicly desperate might actually protect you. I'm not saying you should pretend you have no supplies. I'm saying you should never let people know the full scope of what you have. You manage your reputation carefully. You seem to be getting by, but not thriving. You seem resourceful but not wealthy. You seem capable but not threatening. You're the neighbor nobody thinks about, and that's your superpower. Now, I want to address something else that matters. Children and security. If you have kids, they're going to talk. They're going to tell their friends at school that you have water stored. They're going to mention the generator. They're going to be excited about preparedness. You need to have conversations with your kids about operational security, not in a way that makes them paranoid, but in a way that makes them understand that certain information is private. It's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's just that some things stay inside the family. I also need to be honest about another dynamic, the mental load of not trusting your neighbors. It's exhausting. There's a psychological cost to living in a neighborhood and simultaneously maintaining this mindset of wariness. But that's the trade-off. You can be trusting and exposed, or cautious and secure. During normal times, being trustful is fine. During a blackout, trust has a price. Here's what you're actually preparing for. Not a Mad Max scenario where people are openly violent. Most scenarios don't look like that. They look more like low-level pressure. People asking for things. People watching. People slowly escalating requests. People bringing other people to your door because they know you have supplies. People deciding that the rules don't apply anymore because there's nobody to enforce them. It's not usually dramatic. It's slow and corrosive. So your strategy has to account for that. You build a life and a neighborhood profile that discourages people from thinking you're the person to ask. You're not hostile. You're not strange. You're just not interesting. You're not the person sitting at home with supplies. You're just another person trying to get by. And you have enough quiet preparation that you can actually survive longer than people expect, which gives you options when they're running out. Let me be clear about something, though. I'm not saying become a hermit. I'm not saying never talk to your neighbors. I'm saying be strategic about what you share and how you present yourself. Friendliness and cautious boundaries are not mutually exclusive. You can be the person who helps when asked. You can be kind. You can be someone people feel okay around, but you don't have to be the person they know has supplies. There's also the question of who you actually trust with certain information. And honestly, that list should be really short. Your spouse, maybe a sibling, maybe a truly close friend. But these days, even that's risky because people talk. People post things. People share information casually without thinking about consequences. So even with people you trust, you keep some things private. You have layers of knowledge. Nobody knows everything. Not even your spouse needs to know exactly how much water you've stored or where the really critical supplies are located. I'm going to tell you something else that people don't want to hear. During a blackout, compassion becomes a liability. And you need to make peace with that before the blackout happens. Because when someone shows up at your door asking for help, you're going to feel it. Empathy is a human response. But empathy can also get you killed. Or at least, it can cost you your survival margin. You can't help everyone. You might not be able to help anyone. And that's okay. That's not heartlessness. That's survival instinct. So you make those decisions now, not in the moment. You decide in advance how you'll respond to requests for help. You think about which people matter to you and what you'd actually do for them. You prepare mentally for saying no. You prepare for the guilt that comes with saying no, because that guilt is going to be intense. And if you haven't processed it ahead of time, it's going to make you do something stupid in the moment. Here's my final piece of advice on this. After a blackout, things change. The trust is broken. The masks come off. People remember who had supplies and who didn't. People remember who helped and who didn't. That's not a problem for you in the moment, but it's a problem later. So you need to think about that dynamic too. You're not just surviving the blackout. You're surviving the aftermath. The person you're being cautious with now is going to be your neighbor again once the power comes back on. This is why community relationships are actually important, but they're important in a very specific way. You want to be the person who's genuinely helpful when you can be. You want to be the person people remember as kind. But you don't want to be the person they remember as having supplies. You want to be forgettable, capable but forgettable. A blackout forces human societies to reorganize quickly. The normal rules are suspended. New power structures form. New alliances form. New conflicts emerge. And you need to navigate all of that without being a target. That means being strategic about trust, about visibility, about what you reveal, and about what you prepare in advance. I've seen communities come together after disasters. I've also seen them fall apart. The difference is usually how quickly desperation sets in. And desperation sets in faster than most people think. So prepare accordingly, trust carefully, And remember that the person waving at you today might be asking you for food tomorrow. And how you handle that moment matters. Stay safe out there.